Do know that she is going to come out and speak tomorrow. The remarks that she had planned to give tonight were postponed. She'll be there speaking, we believe, at Howard University tomorrow. I just keep thinking about the picture that they had been painting of Donald Trump in the last days and weeks, this really dire picture, calling him represent and stand for the ideals of this country. Kamala Harris called Donald Trump a fascist. And she continued to argue over and over again that she could bring the country forward, that she could turn the page. And it turns out that the country did want to turn the page. They just wanted to turn the page on Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's administration. And what a remarkable, different vision we are now getting from this election. Elections tell you a lot about what the country stands for and what the country wants. And it is just such a drastically different vision from the one that Kamala Harris was outlining.
And some surprising numbers, given the polling going into this election, and then where we landed as far as the gender gap being, just Gary Langer said, the same gender gap that we've had going back to the mid-90s.
So many gaps, and I'd like to go through them with you, David. First, I'm mindful of our colleague, Charlie Gibson, who 8 years ago on election night said what he found so dismaying were the disparities between so many different groups, whether it was young and old, black and white, male, female, college, non-college. Yesterday, we had the chance to speak with Mark Updegrove, presidential historian, who said not since the Civil War has this country been so polarized. So you have to go back almost 160 years. And so look at what we're talking about. What Charlie was saying in 2016, it's only gotten worse. So if you take a look at the male vote, for example, take a look, 54% for Donald Trump, then it flips when you look for the female vote, 54% for Kamala Harris. If you look at college, this is again nationwide, no college degree, 54% for Donald Trump. Those with a college degree, 57% for Kamala Harris. Everything flips. Look at this. This is the biggest one. The white voters, which made up 71% of the electorate, 55% went for Donald Trump. If you look at black voters, look at this, overwhelmingly 86% went for Kamala Harris. And so the point that Charlie was trying to make is that this bespeaks a country that it's frightening no matter who wins. And so what we heard Donald Trump say tonight is we're going to help heal our country. He said it's time to put the division of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. We're going to try. We're going to try. We're going to try. It's going to happen. Success will bring us together. But I think tonight, so much uncertainty reigns throughout this country, no matter which side you're on.
Yeah, and he did say that he had a taste of that, or insinuated that he did in his first presidency, that when there was some successes, that then support then comes from other corners. Martha, your thoughts on the speech and the night?
The speech and the night, when I heard Kamala Harris give her speech on the Mall, and Mary, you, of course, were there, I was driving through Arizona. And when she said, talking about Donald Trump, this is not America, I had just left a Trump voter standing under gazillion Trump flags, a flag that said Joe Biden is not my president. I thought, actually, this is a big part of America. So bringing this country together, bringing that divide together. Joe Biden said the same thing in his inaugural speech, unity, unity, unity. Donald Trump has said it before, unity, unity, unity. It is a big, big divide. But I also met a couple on the road in Michigan, and just by happenstance, they were camping out, and a lovely little family on the shores of Lake Michigan. And I interviewed the mom, and she was full on, stolen election, I'm all in for Donald Trump. Her husband was all in for Kamala Harris. So I said, how do you do this in a marriage? How do you keep that together? And he said, we just never talk about it. So I guess if they can do that and stay married, the country can certainly do that as well. But boy, is it a big bridge to cross for either side, because the split is enormous. The feelings are enormous. I also think when I look at Kamala Harris, I don't think people in the end really knew her. I'm not sure that message really got out. There was such enthusiasm. I actually drove across all the Rust Belt on the way to the DNC. Such enthusiasm for her, but it just stalled. It just stopped. And I do think voters really didn't get a chance to know her.
Bryant?
Well, first of all, to Jonathan's comment about how I didn't think that this could happen, I actually had a conversation with the president after 2020, and he was obviously upset about the outcome of the election. And I was talking to him, and I told him, look, I know it would have been better just to win, but if you could write the chapter in your book, there would be nothing more Trumpy than for you to lose, run again and win. You couldn't possibly think of a better ending to this story.
But you wouldn't have written the January 6th thing into the chapter, would you?
No, but look, I think two of the things he said was, number one, he wants to help our country heal. Very important comment. That was the first thing, pretty much first comment out of his mouth. But then the second thing, which I think goes to the America First message, he said, we made history for a reason. And I think from Trump's mind, that reason is to do the things that he's wanted to do, which is what I think the American people bought into. We talked a little bit about urban messaging and rural messaging. I think the story of this outcome is that the messaging of Donald Trump was working in both places. And it was eating away Kamala Harris's usual hold in these urban areas. Unions liked what they were hearing. Confront China, who's ripping off the world. Parents wanted to hear about the issues revolving around fentanyl. Illegal immigrants were going into sanctuary cities like New York, San Francisco, Martha's Vineyard, and they were making impacts all over the country. And so I think that's really the message here. And we're going to wait and see. I think it's going to be an exciting time and a great opportunity for people to make a difference.
Donna Brazile, what do you think the Democratic Party takes from this evening, and are, always postmortems? You've been part of those. You've been part of victories along the way, too. Where does the postmortem begin here?
Well, and just sitting here over the last 3 hours, and I've been in this game now for 40 years. I know I don't look a day past 18, but that's because I like to go out when I leave here. Look, winning Illinois 51-47, Joe Biden carried it by 57 points. The fact that we just called New Jersey, we just called Minnesota, I mean, you got to sit here and wonder. The underperformance of key Democratic constituencies, voters, the inability to expand the electorate, significant headwinds on right track, wrong track, the economy that is the envy of the world, according to the Wall Street Journal, but of course, your next door neighbor is struggling. So there's a lot to take away. And there's a lot to learn from, did we do better with young people? Did we do better with seniors? It's going to take a while to figure out, what happened. And it starts with the vice president tomorrow, who will have to address her campaign in the nation and give her own prescription. And I think from there, we're grown-ups. We've never had a problem being a grown-up party, and we will figure out how to heal the party, but also how to rebuild the party and to make sure that we hold if he is the next president, we hold him accountable. Look, tone matters, but also character. And while, the Trump team pulled out a better performance in rural areas and perhaps some of the urban areas, we got to fight. We're going to fight for the future of our country. We're going to fight for democracy. We're not going to stop fighting for women's reproductive health. We're not going to stop fighting for the America we believe in, but we also will try to make peace and extend the olive branch with the Republicans when that moment comes.
Governor.
I think in this election, more than any other election in my lifetime, democracy has been thrown around by both sides more frequently than any time I've ever seen. Well, this is democracy.
Yeah.
This is democracy. And so regardless of whether you agree with this result tonight or you don't agree with it, if, as Democrats now, they really believe in what they said, which is democracy at risk and we need to be standing up for democracy, well, then you need to stand up for this result and respect it. You don't have to agree with it.
Right.
As Donna said, you can continue to argue on the issues that you think are really important to the future of the country, and you should, because that's the way the founders set up this country to be, was to be a conflict that was going to hopefully lead to compromise and resolution. Now, what I'd say to who I believe is the president-elect is that now it's up to you to decide what kind of president you really want to be. You know, every time after an election is over, you have an opportunity to remake yourself and to be from a candidate to a public servant. He has that opportunity now too. And we're going to be able to judge whether he meets what he said tonight and whether or not he meets the goals of what our democracy should be. And that's what I'm hoping for after tonight, is that he meets that. And if he does, the country will be better. And if he doesn't, he too will be judged.
He's aware of how the first presidency ended. You know, John Carl just talked about January 6th, and you know, you can only serve 2 terms. It's a second presidency. Obviously, you're assuming he's the president-elect. We haven't officially called it. The math is clearly heading in that direction. We're just waiting to officially have the math turned into us so that we can then call it. And Rick keeps punching the numbers to make sure that hasn't come through yet, because the moment it does, we will make the projection. But a second presidency, there is opportunity to be different, right? Because there is no re-election. You know what I mean? There was a tone tonight, and part of that message that Reince talked about, you know, about wanting to heal, about unity.
He has to decide, David. I mean, the great thing about being an executive, in my mind, has always been, other than being a member of 435 or 100, is you get to decide every morning who you're going to be when you wake up and how you're going to acquit yourself in a job like that, where you're really the unifying leader if you want to be. And I think that's exactly the opportunity he's got now, without having the constraint of worrying about re-election. And so that's the chance he's got, and we're going to see what he does with it. But remember what I said earlier, he's got 2 years, because this country understands what democracy means too, and it means we move on. And when a president reaches the end of his term, whether he's incredibly popular or unpopular, we move on. And so he's got 2 years to do what he says he wants to do. And if one of those things could be to bring the country together, he would be providing a great service to everybody, both the people who voted for him and the ones who didn't.
And Terry Moran, this running up the score in rural America, and you know, I'm from upstate New York. I know people feel strongly about, you know, where they come from on both sides. It's a very divided part of the country, right down the middle. As part of this postmortem for the Democrats, we were talking about this with Donna, the Democrats, you would think, are going to have to figure out a way to reach, again, not just to count on running up the score in the urban areas on Election Day, but finding a way to connect again with rural America. You might not win those rural counties, but you have to at least connect, and they have to feel like you know, your message, that you hear them, that you see them.
And not talk down to them. And I think that one of the things that a lot of people have felt is, somebody once described the elections of 2016 and 2020 as the front row kids, the kids who know all the answers, telling the rest of the country what to do, and they were rebelling against that. I don't know if that's fair, but it's not just rural America. Where I was born was Cook County, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, and I'm actually shocked at what happened there. So she's going to win Illinois, of course. She did win Illinois by about 225,000 votes. You know, Biden won it by more than 1 million. And Cook County, my birthplace, my hometown, you know, Biden won it going away there. And this year, she lost a tremendous amount. She's winning in the cities. He's winning in the cities. He's making converts to this movement. And now he's got a mandate, an extraordinary mandate, because of the election results and because of this journey that he's been on, having been brought down first by the election and then leaving Washington in disgrace after the attack on the Capitol. And he comes back in triumph, and he's promised, we know what he's going to do. He's going to try mass deportations. He's going to change our trade policy to tariffs. He's going to abandon Ukraine, right? There's no question about that. it's going to be a very different country, and it will probably have long-lasting impacts. He is a historic figure with few parallels in our history.
Rick, any developments on the board?
Sorry to say no. We're sitting here at 266. And look, I don't think we're trying to leave any false impressions about this. You pointed out throughout the night, David, that it is extraordinarily likely that Donald Trump is going to be elected. As we look at the numbers, it is a very daunting task. And again, I'm not trying to project a possibility here where one doesn't exist. Our folks are very careful about this for a good reason. Under the principle that votes matter and the vote counts matter, we still have a large number of votes out of Detroit. We've been told we may get something in the next hour. Additionally there, Wisconsin, that 122,000 vote margin is still a very significant one, but as you can see, you've got 150,000 plus votes out of Milwaukee alone. There's also the possibility that the additional electoral votes come out of Alaska. The 3 electoral votes there have always gone to Republicans, I believe, in the state's history. That's a 15-point lead right now for Donald Trump. But the vote is very, very slow there. And the other one out there is the 2nd congressional district in Maine, which Trump has carried before. He's leading by about 18,000 votes. So there's still possibilities that get him to the magic number of 270 electoral votes tonight.
Take us through some of the other states. New Hampshire hasn't been called yet, right?
Yeah, New Hampshire has not been called, and this is similar to Illinois, as Terry just referenced, a place that is a lot closer than anyone ever anticipated it to be, a 3-4 point race. And just looking inside of it, it's got a story that is very similar to what we've seen in other places, where Joe Biden getting 3/4 of the vote in places like Durham. Doesn't matter in a night like today because he blows it away in the southern part of the state. In addition to that, Harris just not hitting the numbers, Donald Trump exceeding the numbers. And that is one of the remarkable things as we look at this map tonight. It is urban, it is rural, it is suburban, it is red state, it is blue state, it is battleground state. Every single battleground on the board tonight, Donald Trump has won so far. The 3 biggest are the ones that have been allocated, and he's leading by a significant margin in the other 4. It could be an absolute clean sweep of the battlegrounds, and as big a margin as we've seen that you can imagine in a race that was projected to be this close. It, in fact, is this close because of how divided the country is. But to see things tip so consistently in the same direction, to me, is quite striking. And that's an unexpected thing. We've been talking about the popular vote, tracking it now. It's north of a 5 million vote advantage. Which is quite significant, and yeah, it looks likely that he's going to be above 50% in the popular vote.
And what's still outstanding as far as popular vote? I mean, a bunch of California, Nevada, Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, California, because it's the biggest state, is going to be the biggest piece of it. Only about half the vote is in there, so that's another 8 million votes or so. But it's hard to imagine that it comes in a way at this stage, even if it takes another couple of weeks, that changes the margin there. We do have, as we talked about, some significant vote still in those upper Midwestern states. Arizona still has a pretty fair amount, only about half of the vote in, but it's not going to add up in a way that I think that changes the math in a big way. It seems like Donald Trump will have a majority, which is something that he didn't get the time he won. He certainly didn't get the time he lost. Joe Biden didn't get when he won the presidency 4 years ago, to get an outright majority of voters.
Thank you, Rick. I just want to read a couple of notes coming in from world leaders. Macron has posted on social media, "Congratulations, President Trump, ready to work together as we did for 4 years, with your convictions in mind, with respect and ambition for more peace and prosperity." And from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu moments ago, "Dear Donald and Melania Trump, congratulations on history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America. This is a huge victory in true friendship, Benjamin and Sarah Netanyahu." And Martha, that is the next question, how the world responds. These world leaders have, many of them, have interacted, have worked with Donald Trump when he was the 45th president. What is the reaction tonight from around the world and the implications here?
Well, I think you heard Benjamin Netanyahu and former President Trump and likely President-elect Trump has said he backs Israel all the way. But what he has said about Gaza is he wants the war to end quickly. John Santucci reported tonight that I believe it was Donald Trump Jr., not Eric, said one of the first things his father would do is Middle East peace. I mean, he has claimed that the Gaza war, or that the attack on Israel would never have happened. He's claimed the war in Ukraine, that Russia never would have invaded Ukraine. The war in Gaza obviously has been horrific. How he solves that, I don't know. He said he would solve these wars even before he got into office, if he gets into office. Ukraine, I think I have talked to people very close to President Zelensky over the last couple of weeks about the possibility of a Donald Trump presidency. And surprisingly, I think there's a debate going on that they are not really happy with what the Biden administration has done. It has been a slow, painful death for a lot of Ukrainian soldiers. And they have wanted more aid. They have wanted longer range missiles and have not gotten that. So there was, with one advisor in particular, he said, I don't know, maybe Trump can help us out more than anything. Maybe Putin will be afraid of him.
Interesting. John Karl, what do you make of some of the other global impact of Donald Trump returning to the White House? The dynamics at play, NATO, the relationship with NATO, the Biden administration, and President Joe Biden very proud of what he believed were strengthening relationships with NATO, particularly in defense of Ukraine. Where does that go from here?
Well, look, Donald Trump didn't have a lot of policy specifics in this campaign. Frankly, in his White House, he didn't have a lot of consistent policy specifics. But one that he was entirely consistent on was pressuring our NATO allies, demanding that they pay more of our collective self-defense, and even doing things like coming very close, stepping up to the line of taking back Article 5, the idea that an attack on one is an attack on all, that we would come to the defense of any NATO ally that was attacked. He came very close to ordering the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Europe. This is going to be, once again, a very tense relationship with NATO. It's been a very friendly relationship with Joe Biden under very tough times. Joe Biden is a fervent multilateralist. Donald Trump's foreign policy, as he says, is America first. Very different. But one thing that I wonder about, I was in the White House when President Trump came after he won in 2016 and was welcomed in by Barack Obama. And Barack Obama made it clear to the White House staff, he said, we are going to have a smooth transition. Donald Trump has won the presidency. It is our job to ensure there is a smooth transition. There were people in that White House that were distraught. They wanted nothing to do with that. They thought Donald Trump was a threat. It's exactly what you're going to have right now in the Joe Biden White House. I think it'll be very interesting to see Biden's actions in the coming days. There's obviously been zero relationship there of any constructive form. Does, what kind of what does this transition look like, and how does Biden facilitate it?
And Mary, obviously impossible to know, but what must President Biden be making of all this tonight?
If only I knew. It is pretty remarkable, though. I mean, to John's point, though, it will be something to see this handoff. I would expect, given the focus and importance that this administration, that Kamala Harris's campaign put on sort of maintaining these core, principles of democracy, that we would see a handoff. I do think about the ceremonial role that Kamala Harris will have to play in certifying any election results, which will be pretty remarkable to see. And I do think a lot about Joe Biden's legacy. I mean, we've talked a little bit about that tonight. There'll be a lot of questions about the decisions Joe Biden made, the timing of his decisions. I think when he decided to step down and step away from this race, he made clear he was doing so and passing the batons that Kamala Harris could continue the work, could keep his agenda going forward and finish the job. That was his campaign phrase. Now, instead, the exact opposite is likely to happen. I mean, Donald Trump has made it pretty clear he's going to eviscerate much of Joe Biden's agenda and accomplishments, everything from the Inflation Reduction Act to foreign policy, as we've discussed, to climate change and healthcare policy. You are about to see likely, if Donald Trump, and it does certainly seem that's where we are headed. If he is once again in the White House, that he will reverse and undo a lot of what Joe Biden has done.
Yeah. In addition to the mechanics of how this transition is all going to play out, that's all fascinating too. And again, this is not a question that you're going to be able to answer. But when it comes to introspection about the timing of the decision, of passing the torch, doing it when he did, supporting his vice president almost immediately, which a lot of people had great respect for. But when you look at the actual timing of it, that leads to all these other questions about had it been done sooner. Perhaps it would have given the Democratic Party more time to do some sort of a primary between people, and maybe it would have ended up being Kamala Harris. But there's just all these other scenarios that I think people are going to look back on if this goes in this direction, which obviously the math is headed there. We're just being super careful, as we should. But I'm just so curious as to the introspection and the questions that are going to be asked and looking back at these last. I mean, really, she had a 107-day campaign.
107 days. And it was, a 107-day sprint, I mean, without a primary. And we did, I will never forget, we all witnessed those hours after Joe Biden announced that he was exiting the race, to see the party coalesce around her and say, okay, we are doing this. And it came after, for weeks and even really months, so many in the party had questioned whether Kamala Harris, had what it took, if she could do this. And the party quickly sort of answered that question themselves and said, no, we're doing this, and she's the candidate that we believe has the best shot. But Joe Biden insisted until the very end. Just a few weeks ago, he was saying that he still thought he could have won. It was a very bittersweet and difficult decision for him. And you do have to wonder if he is thinking, and many others in the party are thinking, he needed to make that decision a lot sooner.
Rick Klein, I know. Thank you, Mary. Rick, on Wisconsin, you're getting more of the vote total from Milwaukee.
Yeah, pretty significant shift. We had about 16,000 additional votes just come in, 9,000 for Harris, 7,000 for Trump. That tells you the problem. And when you're looking at a number like this, even when you see 138,000 estimated remaining, and that's just an estimate, how hard it is to make up ground. In addition to that, Madison, which we've been talking about, that is the Democratic stronghold, that's basically done. We're not expecting any more, our team is not expecting any more significant vote there. And we can see that drop off once again. It'll be a final number where she did not get what she wanted. And that's an area of the state that Democrats had been seeing their vote share go over and over again. That's the University of Wisconsin in Madison, a liberal enclave, almost unique in the country. And it looks like she hit a ceiling and came down a little off of it. So as we watch those votes, and again, we're still waiting on Michigan, it's so fitting with the pattern everywhere that that's part of what makes it difficult to imagine a scenario where you can make up a gap like this. It's now up to a 325,000 vote margin in Michigan, Wayne County, Detroit, a piece of that as well. There's so many factors that go into this, but at bottom, she just did not get her voters out in anywhere near the numbers that he did. And it may be the case that the voters were out there, but that he got them instead of her, that he was able to represent himself as the candidate of change.
Of change, yeah.
That's right.
I think it was obviously a country that wanted change, and they both tried to establish themselves as the candidate of change. Martha Raddatz brought up the point earlier that in the end, another big question will be, did people really know Kamala Harris? Is 107 days really enough to get to know her? I know she did push for, another debate, another sort of major moment interaction, sort of a tentpole political moment. And he, looking now at the strategy, smartly said, no, one was plenty. And I'm going to barrel toward the election, and so will you, and try to introduce yourself in 107 days. It's a very difficult, in looking back at it, and we knew it in real time too, but we had never witnessed that as well. There have been so many moments in this campaign, obviously the attempts on Donald Trump's life, President Biden's performance in the first debate, President Biden then stepping aside, endorsing Kamala Harris within moments in a tweet, people will look back at all of the timing, all of the decisions that were made, and had they been made at different moments along the way, would the outcome have been any different?
And those moments, as we've said earlier this evening, those moments when she had a chance to define herself on The View, unable to really say what she would do differently than Joe Biden. And I think in the end, too, this came down to job performance. People may not have known Kamala Harris, but she's the vice president of the United States. It wasn't really favorability, unfavorability. You had job performance. And when it came down to it, voters said, I like what Donald Trump did better. than what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were doing.
And not only that, the most recent numbers going into this election, I think it went from Gary Langer's polling, other polling right in the late days, Americans look back with more favorability on Donald Trump's previous presidency, than they did at the end of his presidency coming out of it. So the revisionist sort of history. Governor Christie, I see you over there.
No, look, I think that you're going to look back on what happened in those 107 days for her and recognize that this still comes down to the candidates, right? You know, the candidates have to be able to execute. You have staff who helps put you in a better position or a worse position sometimes. But in the end, it came down to the candidates. And for this campaign, the American people decided that they saw in him more of what they wanted than what they saw in her. And so she's got to evaluate for herself, too. You know, how did she perform and all the rest of it. And to show you that candidates matter, we've been talking all night about how Donald Trump, you know, people have ridden in on his coattails here. I just want to point out what happened in Maryland to show that voters are still, they discern. You know, Harris won Maryland by 23 points, and Larry Hogan only lost by 6. That means 17% of the electorate who voted for Harris turned around and voted for Hogan. Now, it wasn't enough to get Hogan over the finish line, but it tells me again that voters do make discerning choices, David. And in Maryland, a lot of people said, I want Harris, but I want Hogan, and didn't just go along with straight line Democrat or straight line Republican.
This is when they get into this thing.
But by the way, the
Just
age
looking at each
also.
other and
I just hear
Are we
Rick,
over to
Rick Klein's mic.
We'll
We're just
definitely
hearing
want to
your-
go over to Rick.
Yeah, no, we just hear you chatting with your team over
Yeah,
there.
we're just trying to see what's new in there, and just the margin in Michigan is so large. The margin in Wisconsin is so large. It is just hard to see this, and we have just been straining ourselves to try to find it, and just making sure that the math works out. Again, to say nothing of that district in Maine and in Alaska, in addition to the results in Arizona and Nevada. There's not much to suggest in the data, and what we've seen almost in every state in the country to suggest that this is anything but a clean sweep of the battleground states when we are done counting, which we're not at this hour done.
Rachel Scott, let's look at some of these Senate races again. You know, Governor Chris Christie talked about this, and the Arizona Senate race might be the best example of what Governor Christie's talking about, which is that the voter can discern and make decisions. They can vote for somebody for president and still vote for somebody else, a different party for Senate. And it would appear that in that state, obviously, at this point, it looks like Donald Trump clearly, we haven't called Arizona, but has the lead in Arizona. But then Ruben Gallego performing much better than Kerry Lake.
Yes, and this is a prime example of where you have voters in this state, this battleground state, voting for the Democratic Senate candidate, Ruben Gallego, but not supporting the Democratic at the top of the ticket, the Democratic candidate at the top of the ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris. I mean, just look at these numbers, David. You have Ruben Gallego at 51%. He's leading by about 96,000 votes compared to Kerry Lake. And then you have former President Donald Trump at 50%, leading by 37,000 votes. It's fascinating here in Arizona because it's amazing to me just how closely aligned Kerry Lake is to former President Donald Trump. Both never conceded their elections that they lost. She's been riding around the state with a campaign bus with his face on it next to her. She's really been trying to paint herself as a sort of on the shoulder of former President Donald Trump. Clearly, the voters in this state, and it's interesting just to hear from voters in this state, too, that were thinking about voting for former President Donald Trump and voting for Ruben Gallego. One thing that they pointed to was that Kerry Lake just didn't really have enough of the policy to back it up. Maybe she had some of the baggage of some of the rhetoric, but she didn't have the record that Donald Trump had. And they liked the record that Donald Trump had 4 years ago.
Now, on the flip side, some of these other Senate races seem to not only did the top of the ticket seem to affect them, but also this incumbency, this anti-incumbency moment in the country, and the way people really feel about the economy, and whether or not they have experienced at home or with their bills or at the grocery store any sense of recovery that they're being told about in some of these metrics that we have. Let's tick through them. Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, where does that stand?
Yeah, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, all important Pennsylvania. Let's take a look at where this stands here. You can compare and see where Bob Casey stands compared to Vice President Kamala Harris. Both of them right around the same mark here. This is a familiar trend that we're seeing in some of these blue wall states. You have McCormick, he's at 49%, ahead by 71,000 votes. Obviously, former President Donald Trump projected to win the state of Pennsylvania at 50%.
Let's move on to a couple of the other races. When do you want me to pause here, Mark? I'm asking the control room. In 10 seconds, we're just going to pause here so that the rest of the network can sync up with us here for our election, early morning election coverage here on ABC.
For all those who are awake.
Yeah, that's right. We'll take a moment. Hey, listen, I got my start at ABC on World News Now, the overnight show. So we're back. We're back, folks. Back for more. And this from President Zelensky in Ukraine. Congratulations to the real Donald Trump, at real Donald Trump, on his impressive election victory. I recall our great meeting with President Trump back in September when we discussed in detail the Ukraine-U.S. strategic partnership, the victory plan, and ways to put an end to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So, Martha, that is Zelensky reaching out to say, we talked, we spoke, we talked about our alliance. Let's keep it going.
He doesn't have much of a choice there at this point. He has to work with Donald Trump, and he has to see what he can get out of that. I think his biggest worry is clearly what kind of bargain that Donald Trump might try to push him into with Russia. And that has been a concern all along. I mean, you've interviewed him, I've interviewed him. He has been very firm on not giving up any territory, and yet this is grinding on. They have lost so many people. And now, of course, Russia has had to rely on North Korea. They have 10,000 troops in the Kursk area going into that will be on the front lines fighting Ukrainians. So this is getting out of control there. We'll see if Donald Trump is indeed the president, what he does.
And Zelensky, as we know, is politically astute, watches U.S. politics very closely, as he has to, because he knows the future of that conflict rests on his partnership with the U.S. Rachel, let's come back to this discussion. We go to Michigan. It would seem to me Bob Casey's numbers are closer than Kamala Harris, the Bob Casey, Dave McCormick. So that's it just... Yeah, Dave McCormick does not seem to have the number that Donald Trump has. Yeah, that's what I was remembering from the number. So anyway, that's a little closer. We'll have to see where that lands at the end of, I guess, this next 24 hours here. But let's work our way through. Michigan, Alyssa Slotnick, they're both trying to fill the seat of Stabenow, Senator Stabenow, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Alyssa Slotkin, Mike Rogers actually represented the same district right around Lansing. You could see where they are here. Again, another example where you have former President Donald Trump's strong performance in this state really elevating the Republican candidate that is on the ticket, where you have voters in this state voting down ballots. So Alyssa Slotkin, 46%. You have Vice President Kamala Harris at 45%, so she did slightly better in this state. And then you have Mike Rogers ahead by 215,000 votes. Former President Donald Trump leading Vice President Kamala Harris there by 322,000 votes at this point.
Wisconsin, Senator Tammy Baldwin's trying to hold on to her job. Eric Hovde, Republican businessman. He's in the lead at this point. But again, not quite what Donald Trump's number is. She's outperforming Kamala Harris. Still, that's extraordinarily close.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah, this is very close. This could turn out to be a nail biter, and we've been following and tracking these votes. His lead actually narrowing here over the last hour or so. So this is one we're going to be paying close attention to. But you have to imagine Tammy Baldwin, well known in the state of Wisconsin. Again, she has been in public office for about 40 years in Wisconsin. And here you have Hovde getting this close. Baldwin has never had to run a race. She's never had to win re-election with someone like Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. So it does beg the question, what kind of impact did Vice President Kamala Harris have?
Yeah, and Tammy Baldwin's an example of someone who really has tried to go to every corner of the state, rural counties, urban counties. She's very proud of her Made in America stance, and also, for example, in the Affordable Care Act. She wrote part of the act that encouraged you to be able to be covered under your parents' insurance, I guess, when you were a young adult. So those are the kinds of sort of bread and butter things that she's known for. But again, Donald Trump's success might have helped lift Eric Hovde here in the state of Wisconsin. Down the other, Jackie Rosen, I guess, in Nevada. We could check to see Sam Brown seemed to be lifted by Donald Trump's strength there as well. Yeah, look at how close that is.
Yeah, this is another one that is just awfully close here. You have Jackie Rosen at 47%, Sam Brown 47%, 0.2 separating these two. He's ahead right now by 2,600 votes at this point. Vice President Kamala Harris, we see her at 46, Donald Trump at 51. This one is going to be another
Down
nail
to the
biter.
wire. And where do we have outstanding vote in Nevada at this point?
Yeah, the Nevada vote that's still out. Let's take a look at this. Yeah, so Las Vegas is a little bit of a smaller dot. Reno is a battleground, so that's why it's purple on your screen here, and you have some more rural areas as well. So, you know, Las Vegas, Clark County is by far the largest population center. We're estimating about 55,000 votes left there, but it is splitting about evenly. This is actually maybe a mild surprise for the night so far, because so many areas that are a 50-50 split seem to have fallen in one direction or the other. But it's worth remembering that it wasn't long ago that Democrats could win by a couple of points. I mean, that was an 8 or 9 point margin there for Joe Biden in Clark County.
Yeah.
That's what powered the victory. For Donald Trump, he looks like he'll only lose it by about a single percentage point tonight.
I mean, just Clark County is just an example of what we've been talking about all night long. Donald Trump with his best performance out of all three of these campaigns.
And this is, this is a county that is very diverse, a lot of union members. They were hit very hard by the COVID pandemic. Some of his promises to union members, like not taxing tips, very, very popular there. A big Latino vote, as in many parts of Nevada. And it seems, you know, to get to parity in Clark County is a powerful message. And it's part of what we're seeing tonight, which is just a realignment. I mean, these are the kind of election results that we'll be talking about, I think, for many years and many decades. This is what appears to be at the presidential level a clean sweep of the battlegrounds or something close to it. And between the Senate races and other down ballot races, some real inroads that Republicans made with the kind of voters that have been and had been Democrats for quite some time now.
Yeah, and I think it would seem from the exit polling that people just do not feel like that they're better off, that they don't feel like this was an economy for them these last few years in this country. And we do know that the country was emerging from a pandemic. The industrial nations of the world all sort of went through this as well. But people live through their own experience. They just don't feel like life has gotten better as far as the prices they're paying and the bills they're paying, their insurance rates that they're paying. And just in Nevada, we were just looking at Nevada, the housing prices. Martha talked about that earlier. Just such a huge issue when you travel these states. You hear people just talk about the cost of everything.
Yeah, that's right, David. And I think people blamed Harris because she's part of the Biden administration for it. And we saw it so clearly in our polling. And there was this disconnect throughout that if you looked at the polling a certain way and you looked at the issues, you'd say, how can Kamala Harris possibly win this thing? If you looked at it, though, through the personal attributes, you say, how can Donald Trump possibly win this election? And people seem to have said, you know what, I will go with the issues. I'll go with the person who seems to be speaking to me and to the issues that matter to me, even if, as half the people said in our poll, they think he's a fascist, even if they think he is much less honest and trustworthy, even if they have real fears about how he would govern.
I think you really hit on something, Rick, because we saw this from the exit poll at the very beginning of the night from Lindsay, that the unfavorable rating on Donald Trump was quite a bit higher than the unfavorable on Kamala Harris. But to Martha Raditz's point, the anecdote that you shared with us earlier this evening, the gentleman who said, I couldn't vote for him in 2020, I was disgusted, or whatever, I'm paraphrasing, disgusted by what things that he had said or had done. But that this time he'd sort of hold his nose on the words, the rhetoric, and just hope that we get back to why life was better economically for this gentleman that you're speaking of.
Yeah, exactly. And he couldn't vote for him in 2020, but his business has gone south. In fact, I was just looking up another voter who said his costs on material alone on his business, he has a commercial roofing business, are 150% higher across the board. So it's not just they're not feeling this, they're seeing this. Again, this is their truth. Donald Trump can say anything he wants to and exaggerates and has mistruths, but this is their truth. Their grocery bills, they're 150% higher costs across the board. This family was doing really well when I met them in 2020. Their business was thriving. It is no longer. He said they're basically living paycheck to paycheck. It's the most challenging time they've ever had. So
really interesting. And it makes you wonder, again, this is a change moment in the country. We witness these often. Even if it was another candidate that late in the game, had the Democrats gone with somebody else, if the anti-incumbency, anti-Democrat, the economy, the feelings from the economy would have swept Donald Trump back into office.
Or would you have had a candidate who didn't have to be in so many ways so loyal? She's the
To
vice
President
president
Biden.
of the United States. She can't really say we really messed up.
No, and when you that
Yeah.
question on The View, and that played over and over again in the swing states as a campaign ad, Sonny Hostin asking, is there anything, and just the pause and saying, well, I can't think of anything, again, to Governor Chris Christie's point earlier, that a candidate has to perform in those moments. But we all know as human beings, she's probably trying to navigate that in that moment. How do I critique my boss on national television and keep moving? But that's part of it. And that's the hard part, obviously. The challenging part, it goes back forever, of a vice president running after serving a president in an administration.
David, that's why this stuff is hard. But if you want to be president, that's what you got to do. I mean, the bottom line is you got to know that there were differences between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. There had to be times that she disagreed with what he did or did not do. And at that moment, you've got to be willing to be honest with the American people.
And it's an obvious question that's going to
Yes, and I think, the problem is, it's not, I think it's just as much that they felt like she wasn't being honest as it was that she didn't have a delineated difference. Like, they looked at her and said, come on. You've got to be kidding me. Nothing? Nothing you would do differently? I mean, I've been married to my wife for 39 years. I mean, we could come up with, on a daily basis, things that I do or she do that we would do differently. It doesn't mean you have any less affection for the person. She could say, look, I think Joe Biden's a wonderful guy and I think he's been a great president, but I would have done these things differently. People would have looked at her much differently, I think.
I also keep thinking of beyond that question of what would you do differently, and I think we all agree it is very hard to cast yourself as the candidate of change when you are the sitting vice president. But the other question that she kept being asked, and that we were still asking when I interviewed her last week, was, what is day one? What is that first top priority? And it took her a while to find the right message for that. And I think back to covering Joe Biden's race, and it was a refrain in every speech. Day one, this is what I'm going to do. On day one, here's the first thing I'm going to do. And she got around to it, to saying, well, it's going to be this package of economic proposals. I'm going to start with, lowering costs for prescription drugs and bringing down housing costs and bringing down the price of groceries. But it just was a messaging issue. It took her a while to get to that point, and it wasn't breaking through. And so I think you combine that with not being able to articulate those clear-cut differences from Joe Biden, especially on the economy, when people just aren't feeling what you are saying. Inflation's coming down, but if I don't feel it in my wallet, it doesn't matter. That combination is a really hard one to overcome.
And David, history has shown. History.
You all are analyzing a 108-day campaign. Look, I worked for a sitting vice president. And let me just tell you, we had 2 years, and it was 537 votes. This was 107 days. I mean,
Al Gore. For the audience at home,
Oh,
you're
I'm
talking about
sorry.
Al Gore. Yeah,
Al Gore and the year
I was
2000.
there with you, Don.
and thank you for not talking about Florida because I get PTSD. But 3 days, 2 weeks into a campaign, you still had a piece of paper. It took another month. This is basic stuff that you put together for a candidate. There's no polling, no focus groups, no way to project how this candidate is going to actually come on the national stage from vice president to president. Look, we still have a lot of analysis to do. We know where she's fallen short. We know where the Democrats overall underperform, especially in so-called blue states. But at the end of the day, I still believe that the Democratic Party only had one or two paths. And Joe Biden, when he decided to step back, it was to allow the vice president to step forward or to go through a really chaotic process. And the party decided, because there were delegates, to go ahead and step forward, and that's what she did. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, she couldn't answer this question. She couldn't do it this way. She didn't go to North Carolina enough. There will be plenty of time to analyze all of that. But tonight, I think the conversation is Donald Trump, because I was there in 2016, and here I am again in 2024. What did he find, 3 or 4% more voters in these rural areas? Why didn't Democrats detect that Donald Trump was making incremental gains the way he did in 2016 when the wall was broken? So there are a lot of questions that the Democrats have to answer about their coalition, but the fundamentals of having a 107-day campaign and candidate, that's something that the Democrats will also have to discuss, but the country is already making up their minds.
Well, I think that one of the biggest problems with the View answer is that she started at the convention as this candidate of change. I mean, she found this niche, and it was going well. And it started wearing off, and she decided to go on The View, and we all know the answer was that she couldn't think of anything new that she would do. At the same time, Donald Trump was talking about deporting criminals that were here illegally. He was talking about ending these wars within 24 hours, you know, when I walk into the White House. He talked about drill, baby, drill, cheap gas, cheap groceries. And when the two biggest issues are the border and immigration, and people don't like where we're at today on those two big issues, and Donald Trump is the guy that's going to break where we're at on those two big issues, he becomes the change candidate. And when she went on The View and said she would do nothing different than Joe Biden, she reestablished herself as just the Biden administration going on and on and on. And it never really, she couldn't catch on after that. I think that's the bigger reason why this thing, it stalled for her.
You know, Lindsay, what are you saying?
Well, one thing that has changed a little bit since we did this preliminary poll early on, the unfavorability rating, and we talked about how there was a little bit of a revisionist history when Donald Trump first left office, and he had the lowest approval rating of any American president at 34%. Tonight, we see his favorability, 54% of those on the exit poll nationwide, 54%. So more than half of the country said that they don't view him favorably. But of course, as we've been discussing, the economy looms large. I think that for the Democrats, abortion maybe didn't play the role that they thought and perhaps hoped. But this is really a question for perhaps days and weeks later. But I do have to wonder what, if any, role race and gender played. I mean, we're talking about, we have one thing that stands out, a less diverse electorate. When you think about even just at large with the world, of the 193 UN member nations, only 13 have a woman who leads them. Black women are often the last of the table when it comes to even pay disparity in this country, getting 67 cents on the dollar when it comes to white men. You know, Barbara Jordan, when she was asked in 1976, do you think